It continues in the section called Conceptual Framework, Gaming in Context. It states, the dominant approach to studies of gaming and learning focus on the relationship between the gamer and the text. This holds on both sides of the aisle, just as detractors assume that the violent content of the game encourages violent behaviors. Proponents of games and learning generally assume that learning follows from a good game design. You hear that, guys? Feminist Frequency knows darn well that games don't cause people to be violent. And when she said games don't cause you to be antisocial either, that means that games don't cause you to be sexist. The book continues. Although there has been a considerable amount written on games and young people's use of them, there has been very little done to establish an overall ecology of gaming, game design, and play, in the sense of how all these various elements, from code to rhetoric to social practices and aesthetics, cohabit and populate the game world. The language of the media is replete with references to the devil and heavy metal when it comes to the ill-found virtues of video games. Well, a growing movement in K-12 education casts them as the holy grail in an uphill battle to keep kids learning. While many credit gameplay with fostering new forms of social organization, alternative ways of thinking and interacting, more work needs to be done to simulate these forms of learning within a dynamic media ecology that has the participatory and social nature of gaming at its core. So even though Ito admits that violent games don't cause antisocial behavior, she says that the gaming media ecosystems needs to be uprooted to allow for serious games to become the core demographic. I wonder where Macintosh got the idea to repurpose Feminist Frequency to focus solely on gaming. It continues, gaming occupies a complicated position in relation to structures of age, class, and gender because of its status as a technically driven recreational activity usually associated with lowbrow, male-dominated identity and practice. The moral panics over games rotting the hearts and minds of children share many of the familiar concerns voiced about television. Games are frequently linked to the corrupting bad screens of television and working class culture, rather than the good screens of computers and middle class culture. Further, much like earlier forms of youth-centered popular culture, video games are a site of moral panics where intergenerational anxieties are projected onto new media. The technical sophistication of games, both as text and practices, however, throws a unique twist into these existing cultural conflicts. Well, those who see gaming as an avenue into certain forms of technical expertise and learning have argued that educators and designers should work to make games attractive to girls, and that others have argued that gaming reproduces sexist and consumerist logics that are often of dubious value. Did you hear that? Macintosh's employer and mentor expressly states those in a moral panic about video games are misguided. Well, some of us always assume that social justice warriors weren't quite as dumb as they acted, but we can now see that the choice of Feminist Frequency to pretend to be morally outraged by video games had an exact and calculated purpose. Now, I'm going to quote the last sentence again so we could pick it apart to see exactly why Feminist Frequency started their subversive psychological operation at the behest of the MacArthur Foundation and Microsoft Research. While those who see gaming as an avenue into certain forms of technical expertise and learning have argued that educators and designers should work to make games more attractive to girls, others have argued that gaming reproduces sexist and consumerist logics that are often of dubious values for youth. So, Mimi already stated that the moral panic sentiment regarding video games was diluted, which discredits the last part of this statement. So, we'll focus on the first half. Mimi herself is one of those who claims that gaming is an avenue into certain forms of technical expertise and learning. How do we know this? Well, it's the entire premise of the book. So, in essence, she is speaking for herself when she states that educators and designers should work to make gaming more attractive to girls. It's quite the coincidence that Jonathan McIntosh, her employee, decides to use Feminist Frequency to do that exact thing. Like I've said, the reality is that Feminist Frequency is nothing but a psychological operation that was meant to alter the gaming ecosystem in a way that makes gaming more appealing to girls and women. So the real purpose of Feminist Frequency was not to convince all hardcore gamers that they need to hang up their Halo and go play Gone Home, but it was to set themselves up as industry consultants They wanted to hold the keys to the industry. They wanted to have power over developers to be able to tell them what content they can and can't put in their own games. The purpose of this, of course, was to make gaming more attractive to women, or girls specifically. Now, they know that the moral outrage sentiment is ridiculous and pointless and has no basis in actual reality. However, they figured if they could convince enough useful idiots to serve as their army to...
Where is that army?
harass and shame developers into doing their bidding, that it would help with their cause. And this is exactly what we've seen play out. As Mimi Ito, Macintosh's mentor, boss, and friend, arguably the top researcher in the field, claims that the moral panic is completely off base. He knew that from day one. He just was there to do his job.
Since the invention of YouTube.
I've been involved in a whole bunch of grassroots activist-style campaigns for the past really 10 or 11 years. But I thought I would talk about one that's more based on the battle of the story in the media. So this is something that I did pretty much on my own to see what impact and what influence I could have on changing a popular story, or a story that was happening in the popular culture. To echo some of the things that were already said, the media is lazy. I think that's something that we need to remember as people who are interested in social change. They're extremely lazy, the mainstream media. And so what it was that I wrote under my video or on my blog or whatever, that little blurb was reprinted over and over and over and reposted over and over and over again, right? So, taking care to frame something in a careful and intentional way, right, is extremely important, because it's going to be the thing that is reprinted and reprinted and reposted and reposted. What were people saying about this film, about these topics, and then how do you say, okay, well, this is what people are saying. How do I flip that and change that and make that story what I want to say?
Jonathan, something that you just said connects to one of the questions that's come in through the live stream, that anticipation of possible critiques and feeding that into the story that you tell, so you almost preempt the kind of blowback that you could get.
But let's get back to this book, which we now know that Macintosh fully endorses, which was written by his mentor, boss, and friend. Remember, Mimi Ito just stated that gaming does not cause antisocial behavior like sexism or violence, and I quote, "Some have accused games of promoting violence or sexism, despite very little empirical evidence that games lead to antisocial or violent behavior. Popular perception persists in painting a picture of the aggressive, isolated, and compulsive gamer." Well, I do appreciate your alliteration there, Ito. But then she goes on to say that even though gaming doesn't cause sexism, quote, "Unlike the image of the violent gamer, sexism in games does have some grounding in everyday practice, although in the past 5 years the increase has been tremendous in the number of girls and women who game. Most of those gains have been made in the area of casual games and online and handheld platforms, and the more hardcore and technically sophisticated forms of gaming and game modding are still dominated by boys and men. In contrast to these concerns, researchers have been arguing that games have important learning properties that can be mobilized for education.
S42.
For both game players and creators, the majority of attention to video games is oriented toward entertainment. Video game companies, many with a history of providing non-entertainment products, have often positioned themselves away from association with non-entertainment applications. There has been concern, especially in the North American market, that such association could damage their brand with core gamers, or that their company could be the target of a shareholder lawsuit. Cultural attitudes toward the purpose of gaming in Japan have been different. Because personal computers are not as prevalent in Japan as they are here and in Europe, many game consoles have featured educational games and content. In Europe, also there are more games and game-like media oriented toward non-entertainment areas and simulation. Wait, let me read part of that again. Video game companies, many with the history of providing non-entertainment products, have often positioned themselves away from association with non-entertainment applications. There has been concern, especially in the North American market, that such association could damage their brand with core gamers, or that their company could be a target of a shareholder lawsuit. And for the citation here at list, private communication with an electronics arts vice president to Michael Zaida, May 2005. But wait, how could these guys know what Michael Zaida's personal emails were? Oh, it's because Zaida was actually on the committee which authored this paper. Now it's starting to make sense, but it gets much scarier when we move on to the section titled Political Manipulation Through Games on the Internet. It says, large-scale games create a new venue for political manipulation. While some cases of direct political manipulation of an individual have been popularized by fiction such as The Manchurian Candidate, it is the manipulation of large numbers of people that can potentially be accomplished through internet media. Enabled by the internet, political messages can be quickly distributed to the world population with little validation beyond the recipient's own social filters. Games, modeling, and simulation present a new dynamic in the use of the internet as a source of propaganda. There are three main components that need to exist in order for a game to have an effect on its user base. First, the computer game should be well designed to distribute a political message, either covertly or overtly. In the former case, the game may be more likely to convert new people to an ideology. In the latter, it is more likely to target a population in order to reinforce a message or derive an action from a willing user base. The Serbian resistance and pro-democracy game, A Force More Powerful, for example, teaches the strategy of nonviolent conflict. The second requirement to make a game more effective is to adequately model the behaviors of the game's actors in order to optimize the messages being sent. Effects of this could be significant if properly orchestrated by a foreign power or commercial entity. A third challenge for game designers is to create a game that is compelling and fun to play in order to keep audiences attracted to it for a substantial enough period of time to successfully convey desired messages. But when we look up the Defense Intelligence Agency on Wikipedia for the description of the agency, it starts to make a lot more sense why they commissioned this report. It reads, "The Defense Intelligence Agency is the main foreign military espionage organization of the United States, operating under the jurisdiction of the Department of Defense. Established in 1961 under President John F. Kennedy by the Defense Secretary Robert McNamara, DIA has been at the forefront of U.S. intelligence efforts throughout the Cold War and rapidly expanded both in size and scope since the September 11th attacks. Due to the sensitive nature of its work, the spy organization has been embroiled in numerous controversies, including those related to its intelligence gathering activities, its role in enhanced interrogations, read torture, as well as attempts to expand its activities on U.S. soil." Now, according to Yuri Bezmenov, a former high-ranking KGB officer who was a master at subversion and psychological operations, he claims that 85% of military espionage is purely psychological, usually using various forms of propaganda. So now that we know that the DIA is basically the Department of Defense's psychological subversion and intelligence arm, it makes a lot more sense why they financed this report. But ignoring the chilling sentiments of knowing that the military is specifically interested in ways to indoctrinate and brainwash the public with games, which I'm sure has nothing to do with the fact that they just repealed the laws which banned using propaganda on domestic turf, read you and me, well, ignoring that, we have a guy that was on the committee to write the report, claiming that the electronics arts vice president told him in 2005 that he was scared of getting sued by shareholders if he made games which weren't aimed at being fun. So now it makes sense why there might have been a coordinated effort to kill the gamer identity. Apparently, serious games in North America can never really take off the ground while the current cultural attitudes remain in place because the major studios are scared of retribution from hardcore gamers and investors in the current climate. Well, this is all according to the expert committee hired by the national academies anyway. But why would these journalists that wrote the Gamers Are Dead articles really care if serious games actually take hold or not? Well, for one, these journalists want validation in a career that's been largely looked down upon. As the saying goes, game journalists get the same pay as a movie critic, but none of the respect. These egomaniacs surely had a vested interest to change that. But it's also not outrageous to entertain the idea that these journalists were informed of the propaganda qualities of serious games, and if that were the case, they could have seen their Gamers Are Dead articles as essentially voting in bloc as a form of political activism in order to enact change. Now, considering that I uncovered a video from 2006 where two of the Vox Media and Polygon founders gave a speech to Microsoft Research wherein they teach Microsoft the wonders of internet propaganda, it's not hard to believe that these guys might have been useful idiots who believed that they were just being good little radical leftists. However, I wouldn't give Chris Plante, who was a co-founder of Polygon, a pass.
Welcome to the Visiting Speaker Series. I'm so glad you could all join us this afternoon for the amazing talk by the amazing bloggers Jerome Armstrong and Marcos Zuniga, who write the Daily Kos and Jerome's fabulous blog, which is called Mighty D. They've done some really interesting work and some really interesting thinking around how do the new grassroots within our political structure in the United States work? Do these new technologies actually create a space where different types of people are having a new political voice? Do these types of structures help people actually get together and become a true force politically?
In terms of where Marcos and I came into this whole new phenomenon, and I think we can look at the internet as an opening to many more voices than were present, was within the political arena. Following the 2000 election, both of us got involved in politics, sort of ramping up, but we both became, there was a vacuum out there in terms of partisan voices on the Democratic side, and voices in general that were authentic and that reflected politics from the point of view of ordinary people instead of from the point of view of either journalists that were covering politics from their particular standpoint for years on end, or from politicians and parties that have become ossified and sort of used to a certain way of the media presenting their elections and campaigns. And so we stepped into that vacuum and quickly found that there was a lot of people out all across the nation that were interested in hearing an authentic voice, but not only that, they were interested in participating by commenting not only with us, but with other people on the blogs in this new way of political dialogue. And from
I actually wanted to be a programmer when I grew up, but I wasn't good at it. So it's always been my shame that I couldn't do what you guys are doing. I like to say that I don't consider myself a leader. What I do consider myself is somebody who's creating the infrastructure and the machinery to allow leaders to emerge and allow those leaders to be supported, and in a way that was not possible just a few short years ago. And so we as a movement, progressive movement, have been losing a lot of this talent, a lot of the best and brightest in our movement. Conservatives, on the other hand, have been very, very effective at nurturing that talent and pulling it into their system. So rather than losing, what they're doing is they're actually out there recruiting from corporate America, pulling them into their movement, and they pay them well, and they nurture them, and they mentor them. And so what you have is a machine that is extremely up-to-date, technologically super advanced. The Democratic Party has failed to communicate with their supporters and with people who are persuadable in just about 80% of the country, huge swaths of the country. Republicans are it's ossified, it's insular, and it's hard to break through that. And we basically made a statement that, look, if you guys you don't go along with this, then we're on the outside, we'll break in by ousting you out of the party itself. That, look, if you guys you don't go along with this, then we're on the outside, we'll break in by ousting you out of the party itself at the very precinct level. So there's been participation within the Democratic Party in terms of opening some of that up, but obviously Howard Dean was just one step in. There's a lot more work to be done. Yeah, Howard Dean's at the top, so we had to break through the state parties and and down to the county level. And, you know, like Jerome says, you can't find information on how to take over your local party because it's on purpose. They don't want challengers. And they'd rather lose and carry their fancy little title because it makes them feel like big shit, rather than actually have to work and do their jobs, which is to actually create more Democrats and start winning some elections. And again, you know, to us, it's all about technology. I mean, we don't need to march on the streets. You know, as far as I'm concerned, marching in the streets is, you know, useless. It's an old story. Nobody cares anymore. A bunch of people in the street. You know, you think, don't they have something better to do with their time than to march in the street over some stupid thing? But a bunch of people get online and they exert pressure online. You know, to me, that seems to be more impressive. Because a lot of times, you know, it's not one or the other. A lot of times, you know, you create these narratives. Like the Cindy Sheehan story. So one of the things that the blogs were able to do is really create the buzz that allowed some of this media to have a hook to go down. So, you know, technology. We're a media-saturated world now. Media's the future. Now with convergence, television, and the internet, I mean, it's going to be absolutely dramatic. So we're going from 500 channels to unlimited, to the entire internet on a television. So how are we as a movement going to take advantage of this? Are we going to let the Republicans once again take the lead and dominate that? And if you're a Republican, you know, I'm sure there's some of you in here, you know, that's what you're hoping. Right, you're hoping more of the same. And, you know, for us though, we're saying, you know, we have the talent. I mean, Silicon Valley and up here, and you know, New York, Silicon Valley, and all these tech centers are very heavily progressive, very heavily democratic. It's a crowd that maybe hasn't been as political in recent years, but that's been changing quite a bit lately. So why don't we harness that energy and that expertise and that power to build this next generation movement that will not only dominate and take over the Democratic Party, we lose on infrastructure. So unless we turn that around, and it's going to be people like you guys, really. I mean, when we look at a lot of the advocacy stuff that has been very effective the last couple of years, a lot of it is a bunch of, you know, a database guy getting together with maybe a Perl programmer or a C++ and a designer, and they put together some kind of advocacy site. So it's that sort of thing. It's getting people who know the chops, who know how to operate in this new world, this brave new world of technology and media, and getting involved and doing change, because it happens, and it's for people like you guys, and, you know, for us too. I mean, it's not as hard as it was once upon a time to get 1 million people to march on the mall in D.C. So to me, that's pretty exciting. It's a democratizing of activism. And it's a very tangible way to start trying to push the Democratic Party and the nation closer to where it really should be, as opposed to where it's at today.
So as we've just witnessed, the two Polygon founders just admitted that they're involved with blogs with the sole intent of pushing a narrative that helps indoctrinate people into becoming voting Democrats. And that's their true goal with all their media enterprises, is to create more Democrats through propaganda. And we know that Polygon has been pushing an extremely biased feminist agenda. So it all makes sense. But let's get back to these gamers are dead journalists. The 12 journalists who basically kicked Gamergate off by writing these articles which were meant to tell the industry that the core gamer demographic simply didn't matter anymore. So with that said, could there have been someone that was pulling the strings? Someone that tricked other people into doing their dirty work and pushing an agenda that's far more sinister? Like maybe an agenda involving billions of dollars in corporate and financial interests involved? I don't know. That sounds like a tinfoil hat conspiracy. I mean, it doesn't seem very likely that a corporation would try to influence the public in any way when there's billions, possibly trillions of dollars in future profits to be made, but I guess we could entertain the idea. So, if a conspiracy was involved, what connections would there be? Wait, wasn't this paper, which distinctly detailed why the gamer identity had to be killed, authored by a committee at the National Academies? Where have I heard that before? I remember now. The creator of the game journal ProList, Kyle Orland. Well, his father was a director of the Center for Education at the National Research Council, which is one of the arms of the National Academies. He had been a director there just 3 years prior to the report, but I know what you're thinking. That doesn't mean that Mr. Martin Orland was still in close contact with the National Academies. I mean, he probably didn't even read the report, right? Well, Considering that Orland gave a keynote speech at the National Academy's convention in December 2014, 4 years after the report was authored, it's pretty safe to say that Orland has been in close contact with them the whole time. Not to mention, Orland still lives in the same city as the academies, and also, he's a senior program director for evaluation and policy research at WestEd, as well as the director of the Mid-Atlantic Comprehensive Center for the U.S. Department of Education. Wait, so he's the guy that's actually in charge of policy research for WestEd? Someone that's in charge of policy research would surely have read the report on games, especially considering WestEd has their own division focused on gamification, and WestEd has worked directly with the national academies on gamified educational issues. See, WestEd is widely known for being a massive promoter of Common Core. It seems to be their solution for everything, and they shill Common Core wherever they go. Even in an hour-long presentation to Univision to try and convince Hispanics that it's going to be great for them. According to them, Common Core is great for special ed, and Common Core is just great all around, but who's the biggest promoter of Common Core in the whole wide world? Why, Bill Gates, of course. And it turns out that the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation gave a $3.45 million grant to Mr. Orland's WestEd nonprofit the day before the Gamers Are Dead articles dropped. And in what seems to be an even stranger coincidence, Kyle Orland, the creator of the Games Journal Pro List, which essentially turned the burgers and fries controversy into Gamergate proper, actually has someone living in his home that has even more direct ties to Microsoft. Turns out, someone was dumb enough to actually marry Kyle. Her name is Michelle Mazurek. Aw, don't they look like an awfully cute couple? Turns out, she was a senior consultant with Booz Allen Hamilton, which is a major tech firm. But I was able to obtain a copy of her resume, and apparently, she was only a senior analyst there up until 2008. But what's really interesting is that in 2010, she was an intern at Microsoft Research, which coincidentally was the same year that Kyle Orland started the Games Journal Pro List, and also the same year that the National Academy's report was released. And for those who harbor any doubt that Michelle and Kyle were still married in 2010 when she was an intern at Microsoft Research, well, we have a tweet from 2012 which confirms that they were. Microsoft Research. Microsoft Research. Where do I remember hearing Microsoft Research before? That's right. From the video in 2007 where Microsoft Research flew an expert from the national academies across the country to come give them a speech about how the gamification of education was absolutely vital to national security. And one of the guys that asked a question at the end of her video, Ben Sawyer, who gave a presentation on serious games the very next day, was actually one of the co-authors that was on the committee to write the 2010 paper, which says that the North American perception of games needs to change before major studios can venture into making serious games. And the lady who gave that presentation herself was actually one of the authors of the 2011 paper at the National Academies. So, maybe this is why Michelle Mazurek already deleted her resume after I posted a link to it on 8chan. But here's an archive of the Google search of her resume PDF, proving that it does indeed show that she interned at Microsoft Research in 2010, and I didn't alter the PDF file myself. Plus, we have the academic papers she wrote for Microsoft Research while she was interned there. Also, I found proof that the National Academies were deeply studying gamified education, even when Martin Orland was the director of behavioral sciences there. You could be rest assured that he was aware of all the game research and was also in contact with Microsoft Research at the time. Well, Microsoft External Research, to be specific. See, that's actually the purpose of Microsoft Research. Here's what MS Research has to say about itself. Microsoft Research believes that collaboration between the public and private sectors, combined with the power of computing, can help researchers as they work to solve most of the urgent challenges in medicine, environmental science, engineering, education, and many other fields. That worldwide collaborative research is driven by Microsoft External Research, an arm of the larger Microsoft Research organization, and it is designed to complement and augment the work pursued by Microsoft Corporation's more than 800 researchers, in partnership with distinguished scientists, researchers, academics, and educators. Microsoft External Research is building technologies and services that have the potential to strengthen and accelerate advances in important areas of research. Microsoft External Research supports long-term initiatives to enhance teaching and learning through the creative use of technologies such as robotics, tablet PCs, collaborative technologies, and gaming development in the curriculum to illustrate core concepts and principles of computer science. Now, we know that the 2010 Academy's report came out the same year that Kyle's wife was an intern at Microsoft Research, but Orland had been hyped about the Microsoft-backed Serious Games initiative since 2006, when he wrote a lengthy article about it for The Escapist when he attended the Serious Games Summit. And in a strange coincidence, Leigh Alexander, which was one of the authors of the original Gamers Are Dead articles, who wrote perhaps the most prolific scribe of the bunch, was also wooed by Microsoft's Serious Games initiative. Actually, her very first Game of Sutra featured article was about a Microsoft event in 2007, and her rallying call was about how serious games are taking over and are going to change the world. But back to the subject of Martin Orland and his relationship with Microsoft. Being a director of the research division at WestEd, which is perhaps the most influential educational think tank in the country, and being a top dog in education himself, you can guarantee that Microsoft was in direct contact with Orland all along. This becomes doubly apparent when you realize that when he left his position at the National Academies in 2007 to move to be the senior program director for evaluation and policy research, right when he joined WestEd is when they started to rake in the Gates Foundation dosh in the form of grants. They received around $6.5 million in grants over the decade, including the $3.45 million grant they received on the day before they killed gamers, which was a bigger grant than all the other ones combined, mind you. But just as I was writing this script, another brand new WestEd grant popped up on the Gates Foundation site, another $3.5 million grant in April, and this time the grant is specifically to promote Common Core. That's $7 million in grants from the Gates Foundation this year alone. You could say that WestEd is Bill Gates' first and foremost educational think tank and Common Core promoter. And what's more, the Academy's report from 2011, which explained why they had to kill gamers, says specifically that most of the funding for gaming educational research comes from the MacArthur Foundation. Actually, Microsoft is a major funder for these projects as well, but they weren't mentioned because the National Academies didn't want to seem too obvious.